Hi, I'm Brian McKenzie from TrustRadius, and today I'll be going over the basics of Photoshop. I use Photoshop to make video graphics, channel banners, and to touch up photos and graphs for blog posts. Photoshop offers all sorts of advanced features that you can learn as you use it more, but today I'll be showing you enough to get you started with the program. Throughout this video, I'll be going over when you should use Photoshop, how to make a Photoshop project, what each Photoshop tool does, as well as how layers work. There will be timestamps in the video description if you want to jump to a specific portion of the video. Photoshop is built for editing photos and creating rasterized images, meaning detailed images where the dimensions of the image are static. It's a popular choice for creating banner ads, video graphics, and graphics for print material. Conversely, for vector-based images that need to scale up and down without losing their detail, Photoshop's sister program Illustrator may be a better choice. As a general rule, if you know the size of the graphic you want to make, Photoshop is a good choice. If that graphic needs to scale up and down, Illustrator is the way to go. So now that we know when we should use Photoshop, we can create our first project. To do that, we can click Create New on the left, or we can go into the File menu and click New here. I like to go through the File menu because that will always be accessible no matter what screen you're on in Photoshop, but either way it's going to pull up this screen. It's going to give you this default Photoshop size to start with. So we can go ahead and set our title. I'm going to call this Test for now. And then you can also set your dimensions. You can set them to whatever's appropriate for your project. I like to use pixels for digital work because it gives me the exact width and height in pixels and makes that easily changeable. You can also change your orientation by clicking here, and you can see all that does is flip my width and height. So you can also set that manually by typing it. All of these other settings we're going to leave the same, which will be fine for basic projects. Once you make your project, Photoshop will give you a white canvas and a list of tools on the left side of the screen. This white canvas is called the background layer. You can see that if I try to edit it, it will tell me I can't unless I convert it to a normal layer. I'll explain more about layers later, but for now I'm going to turn our background layer into a normal layer by clicking this lock button. And you can see that the name changed from background to layer 0. This means I can edit it like a normal layer now. To add an image to our file, to our project rather, we can go into our folder where the image is, just drag it in. We can also, if we want to open it separately, go to File, Open, and we'll open it in a separate project. You can also see that this image came in on its own layer, which means we can edit it separately from the background. So now that we have our image dragged into our project, let's start to go over some of the tools that Photoshop gives us for editing. The first one is the Move tool, which lets us drag things around the canvas and place them however we want. You might notice, if I move the background here, that in the back is this checkerboard pattern, and that indicates transparency. So what that means is if I were to export this now, this would be see-through. So we could put the graphic over a background and the background would show through. This is useful when you're creating graphics that you're going to add to a document or a larger infographic where there's things behind it that you want to see. After the Move tool is the Marquee tool, which is right here. And you can see if we right-click it, we can choose a rectangle, an ellipse, a single row, or a single column. So we're going to take the rectangle tool and go to over here where we had opened our logo in its own layer. And we can select a portion of our project. So once we have it selected, we can move it around with the Move tool or edit it with any other tools, and then press Ctrl-Z to undo if we want to put it back where it was. If we want to get rid of this area, we can also press Delete and then undo to bring it back. If we want to get it in a different shape, we can also switch to the Ellipse tool. And now we can select in a circular area. And grab like that and move it around and edit as we please, just like we could with the rectangle. The Lasso tool below the Marquee is very similar to the Marquee tool, except it lets us get weirder shapes or less regular patterns. So let's say I wanted to kind of just grab around here and draw this weird little shape, and then I just have this section. So we use the Lasso tool when we want to get an oddly shaped portion of a photo or image. But other than that, it behaves very similarly to the Marquee tool. Below the Lasso tool is the Object Selection tool, which lets us select an object without getting its background. So if we want to grab just this top part of our logo without grabbing all of the white around it, we would take our object selection tool and drag around it like so, and it will try to select just the logo. As you can see, it's not quite perfect. If we zoom in here, you can see it left some of the outline behind. This is a common problem with the object selection tool. With some objects, it'll grab the whole thing perfectly, and with some it won't, and you'll have to do it manually. But this tool will get you a good start if you want to grab an object. If you right-click the object selection tool, you can also get this magic wand tool, which does the same thing in that it lets us select an object, but in a different way. So what it does is, let's say we want to grab this T. We can click on it with the magic wand, and it will attempt to get the object for us. Like the object selection tool, not perfect. You can see it left a bit of an outline behind. But especially if you have objects that are one solid color, it'll grab the whole thing for you. And even if you don't, it's still a good start if you want to grab an object. Next up is the crop tool, which lets us change the size of our canvas, potentially removing unwanted parts of the image. So we select the tool, and we can see it makes these draggable objects in the corners and on the side. So we can drag these to change the size of our canvas. And then we can drag the canvas to center it however we want. So maybe we want to center it on this top part of the logo. Once we're happy with our crop, you can click anywhere outside to confirm it. And if you want to undo it, you can press Ctrl-Z to undo your crop. The frame tool lets us create a space for an image to go, sized however we want it. So we can click on the frame tool and then draw a square, and that'll make a frame for us. Then if we want to add an image to it, all we have to do is drag our file into the frame, and there it is. And the thing about frames is that we can center the object anywhere in it, and we can make the frame smaller, and it will only show part of what we have in there. So we can sort of manually crop with our frames, and you can see that frames come in as a separate layer, so we can edit them separately from our other layers. The Eyedropper tool is used to select colors. Many tools require you to input a color to use, so if you want to make sure you have a color that matches objects in your project, you can select from an element of your project by clicking on it. So you can see here I get this light blue, now I have this dark blue, and now I have that white. So whatever you click is the color you get. So next up is the spot healing brush tool, which we can use to remove blemishes from an object. So what that means is, if I add a color that doesn't belong to one of my objects, I can add color in green here. I can take our spot healing brush, zoom in a bit so you can see it better, and that will try to correct the area based on the area around it. As you can see, the green went away and it fixed up to this blue. So this is best used in photo editing. Say if you wanted to remove a blemish from a shirt, or something from an image that doesn't belong and is on kind of a monocolored background. The more complex the background is, the more likely this tool is to not correct it very well. But if it's on a monocolored background, it'll work very well. After the blemish removal tool is the brush tool, which we can use to draw onto our canvas. So we can click it over here, and then up here you can see we can change the size of the brush, the hardness of the brush, and the texture of the brush. Once we've done that, we can select our color in the top right, or on the bottom left. If we want to, we can also get a color with the eyedropper tool and switch back to the brush, and it will keep it. If we want to make changes at a very fine level to our graphic, we can reduce the size of our brush down to as small as a pixel, and then we zoom in, we can edit our piece at the pixel level. We go back to the brush tool. And then we can again use Ctrl-Z to undo those additions. The clone stamp tool lets you copy a portion of your project and paste it elsewhere. So to start, we're gonna select the tool, and then to choose what we wanna copy, we are gonna hold down Alt and click what we wanna copy. So now, whenever I hold down left click, it's going to start to paste. So as I press left click, a cross is going to appear where I alt clicked. You can see as I move my mouse, the cross is also moving. So if I move off of this light blue onto the dark blue, you can see it's also pasting the dark blue. And it's going to do this for the entire object. So if you cover the whole thing, you can paste the entire object. So you can use this tool to copy and paste parts of objects in your project so that you can have multiple copies of them. Next up is the history brush tool, which you can think of as sort of a fancy undo tool. So if we select the tool, we can hover over any recent change we made, and it will remember what it used to look like. So before we cloned this logo, there was nothing here. So if we cover it with the history tool, it will just get rid of it. And you can also use this to bring elements back. So if we select part of our logo and delete it, we can take our history brush tool, and it will remember that the logo was there and add it back. So you can use this to fix changes that were made too long ago for you to fix with the undo button. So if you make a change and then do 12 other edits and then realize you want to undo the change you made 12 edits ago, you can do that with the history brush tool. The eraser tool, which is below the history brush tool, is a pretty straightforward one. Much like the brush, we can change the size of it up here. And when we click, it will delete parts of our canvas. So we can use it to delete objects, delete background elements, delete whatever you want. And then if you want to undo it, you can use Control-Z to get rid of the changes that you made. The gradient tool is used to create gradients on a page. So if we click our gradient tool, we want to set our two colors, because these are going to be the two colors that it makes the gradient from. So if we want the gradient to start red, for example, we would go ahead and set our first color to red. Go into our second color. Say we want it to go to this light green, and we'd set that. Then we would grab our gradient tool. See, it sets it up here. And we would drag to where we want the color to start changing. So if we want it to start going from red to green here, we would release here. See, it would do that. If we wanted it to go diagonal, we would do so like that. And you can see that it covers this layer because we're drawing the gradient on this layer, but it doesn't cover our frame because that's on a different layer. So if you want your gradient to be a background, you need to make sure you make a background layer and put the gradient there, and then put all of your other objects on different layers on top of it. Next up is the blur tool, which we can use to make parts of our project blend together. So for example, if I zoom in here so we can see closely, I can go get the blur tool. And if I drag it here, we can even zoom in a little more. You can see it's starting to change the pixels here so that we have a softer transition, which is hard to notice from here, but the more we zoom in, the more you can see it. So you can use this when you want to blend two colors together and make a bit of a softer transition between the two of them. After the blur tool is the dodge tool, which we're going to stay zoomed in here to get a good look at. So you can select the dodge tool and set its size like you can with many of the other tools. And then we're going to use this tool to lighten up parts of our project. So let's say we want this blue to be an even lighter blue. We can hover it with our dodge tool and just click. And each time you click, it'll get a little lighter until it eventually turns completely white. And then, as usual, we can use Control-Z to undo that change. Next up is the pen tool, which we can use to draw lines and shapes, but more often than not, you're going to use it to specifically select objects. So we're going to zoom out a bit, just enough that I can see this whole letter in the logo. So then we're going to take the pen tool, and we're going to select this part of the logo, and we're going to try to get as close as we can quickly. So we can click our starting point with the pen tool, then each time we click, it's going to draw a perfectly straight line between the 2 points. We can use this to get a close cut of our object with minimal white space. Now, if you were trying to do this perfectly, you would take more time than I'm doing now, and probably zoom in a bit more and really make sure you're catching the edges and avoiding white space like I caught here. But as you can see, this is much closer than we can get with something like the rectangle tool. And when the object selection tool won't work, this is a good way to get a perfect fit on your object. And you can see it makes a path in here we can use to make a selection. And we can move our object, edit it as we please. After the pen tool is another pretty straightforward one. We're going to go back to our normal screen size and grab the text tool, which we use to add text to our page. So we can set the font up here and the font size up here. And when we are ready to place our text, we just click and we start typing. Oh, and you can also set the font color here as well, of course. You can then move this around. Comes in as its own layer, so you can edit it in the same way you would edit any other object on a layer. And if you want to get rid of it, you can just click it and hit delete. After the text tool is the path selection tool, which we can use to select any paths that we've made previously. We made one earlier when we used the pen tool, so we can select it by left-clicking it. Now we can drag it around, edit it, or delete it. So we can use this to change our paths or make a copy of our path, so we could make a shape like the one we made a path around over here if we wanted to. You can also use this to make selections in a different location. So if for some reason we wanted to make a selection in the shape of our path over here, and then edit that, we could do so. The shape tool, which will be the rectangle tool by default, is used to create shapes. So we can see that it can make a rectangle, a rounded rectangle, an ellipse, a polygon, a line, or a custom shape. So starting with the rectangle tool, we can click that, and then if we left click and drag on our canvas, it'll make a rectangle. We can change the color by going to the menu over to the right and selecting the color here. We can also make different shapes. So we can make an ellipse or a rounded rectangle, or we can make a custom shape. Now, when we do that, we actually pick the shape up here. Photoshop gives us a number of preset custom shapes. So we could make a camel, for example, or whatever other shape we want, like a tree. You can also import some custom shapes of your own, but Photoshop does give you a library to choose from if you just want some basic custom shapes. The last couple tools here kind of go hand in hand. We have the hand tool and the zoom tool. The hand tool lets you drag around the canvas so you can see different parts of it, but as you can see, if the canvas is already filling the whole screen, the hand tool doesn't do anything. The zoom tool lets us zoom in. So if we click the zoom tool and then zoom in a couple times, now the whole screen doesn't fit the canvas. So if we use the hand tool and click, we can drag around to view different parts. Then if we use the zoom tool, again, we can left click to zoom in, or we can right click to go back to normal size or zoom out. Okay, so now that we've gone over all of the tools in our basic toolbar, I also want to go over the basics of layers. And to do that, I've made this new project where we have a background layer and an empty layer 1. And the way you make a new layer is you click this little plus button here, and it will make a blank layer for you. Layers in Photoshop are what we use to segment our project into sections that we can edit separately. They are transparent by default, so you can see through them to the layers below. And the base layer of most Photoshop projects is the background. So for us, it's this. Now, if we want to add a background to a project, we want to make sure we add it to the background layer so it doesn't cover our other work. So let's take layer 1, for example. We can use a nice bright color here, and draw a little smiley face. Now, if we want a gradient background behind that, if we do that on layer 1, here, let's make this a different color. Make this a gray that the pink will stand out against. But if we do it like this, it'll completely cover our work and you won't be able to see it. So what we need to do is add it to the background. And as you can see, since the background is below layer 1, our work still appears over the background. So you want to make sure that when you're building your layers for your projects, you have your elements in the background that you want to appear behind the elements in the foreground. And the elements in the foreground are the ones that you want to make sure are completely visible and won't get covered by anything else. You can also hide layers whenever you want, so you can see what your project would look like without a certain element. So you shouldn't be afraid to add as many layers as you need to when working with Photoshop. A lot of projects will require the use of many layers. This is normal and totally okay. Hopefully now you have an understanding of all of Photoshop's tools that you can use to perform basic photo editing. If you're on the fence about Photoshop, feel free to check out some of the trusted reviews on TrustRadius, like this highly detailed review from a user interface designer. You can access TrustRadius at trustradius.com or at the link below in the description. Alternatively, if you're already using the program, we at TrustRadius would love to hear your review of the software, which you can also leave at the link below.